Thank you, Pat. And good to welcome everyone. Welcome. It is, as Pat said, it's lovely to just be able to look at, I think of them, the Hollywood squares, everyone's image here, and just seeing everyone. And it's kind of, I feel a real sense of sangha, of community, being able to just look at everyone. And many of you, obviously, I know from when we were meeting in person and from other things, and some, as Pat mentioned, coming from farther away because it's possible in these times. So, one of the, in a sense, the blessings of this time, in a sense, almost a saving grace that we're not able to be together in this period, but at least we do have this way of being together, which, I've said before, we wouldn't have even been able to do 10 years ago, no mind, longer ago than that. And so it really warms my heart to see each and every one of you here, and want to let you know how welcome you are, whoever you are, wherever you're from, whatever you believe, whatever your race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, physical, mental abilities, whatever, however you show up, that you're welcome, more than welcome here, very welcome here. And welcome here. Happy 4th of July weekend at a very, very unusual time, a kind of extraordinary time. Here in the middle of a pandemic where, most of us saw and heard the fireworks last night, but very few of us probably were out and about and rubbing shoulders with people, hopefully not, in this time that we're living in. So we have to obviously take care of ourselves and take care of each other in these times. And, at this time, as everyone knows, in about 40 states now, the numbers of folks with the virus has gone up, and in some states it's very, very intense. Thinking particularly Florida and Texas and Arizona, but others as well. And where we're from, where we're broadcasting from, where we're meeting from, the DC area, fortunately, we've stayed fairly flat. Well, the Virginia, Maryland, and DC is my understanding, but we're kind of a little pocket in the Northeast right now. So it's a very unusual time, as often I say. And what I want to talk about today and reflect on is topical. This 4th of July weekend, and the reflection I want to share is on the Dharma and American democracy. It's kind of sounds like a very ambitious theme or title to talk about, but I want to talk about a particular kind of aspect and a particular way of seeing things that can be liberating, can be freeing, and I want to look at it. I want to talk about, when I say the Dharma, now for some people that's kind of, one of those foreign words, but for many of us, we're kind of familiar with it. What I mean by the Dharma is the teachings and the practices of the Buddha, 2,500-year-old practices that have come down and been practiced through 100 generations, come down to us today, in the form that we kind of practice them here and in the West, have really been the last couple of generations only. So 2 generations, a generation and a half even, out of 100 generations, a very small period of Buddhist history. And the Dharma in a broader sense means more than just the Buddha's teachings, but any wisdom teachings, any teachings that lead to freedom, whether they come from the Abrahamic tradition, the Jewish, Christian, Islamic tradition, of the Hindu or Sufi or non-religious, spiritual, or philosophical traditions. The key thing is, do these teachings and practices help us find freedom in our lives? I think that's kind of the bottom line that I want to look at, explore. And the theme, kind of the sub-theme really is ways of seeing that free us, ways of seeing, ways of understanding that free us. And so I want to look at kind of the Dharma teachings, but I want to kind of just name those at the beginning and come back in the later part of this reflection, and kind of really focus on the time, this 4th of July weekend, focus on the time that we're living in, particularly this time that we're living in collectively in the world, the pandemic, but particularly in this case, the time that we're living in the United States, and this time in American democracy. This 4th of July weekend, it seems like a valuable and important time to kind of reflect on where we are. And I've shared, and there are kind of respected people, some of them coming from the conservative side of the political spectrum, who see this coming election that we'll be having in November as the most important, the most consequential election since 1864. 1864, as we know, I think you all know, is right in the middle or towards the end of the Civil War, ended in 1865, and that this election, the choices that we're going to be making in November, are extraordinarily consequential. For myself, I believe that they really, without hyperbole, that the democracy and the rule of law are very much in the balance, depending on how things turn out and how things unfold in those elections. And I share this, and knowing that to talk about politics is very much to kind of very easily trigger the amygdala, that part of our brain that gets us into fight or flight, and we take sides, and we're right, they're wrong. And I'm bringing this up not as part of taking sides, but of really stepping back and looking just in a brief way at American democracy at this time. I mean, if you just think of, I mentioned last week we showed Van Jones' just short reflection, 5 minutes, as part of the effort around Wisconsin. Talking about the time that we're in the middle of, and kind of when we're in the middle of something, we're not necessarily getting a kind of a very broad picture of it because we're right there. But if you think about it and step back from it, the significance, some of these are symbols, but symbols are extraordinarily important. As we all know with flags and how much, the things, statues, and we think of, what's happened just in the last few weeks. Putting aside the pandemic, obviously that's an important factor in all of this, but, think of NASCAR banning the Confederate flag. Think of Mississippi, which voted back 2001, I think, to keep the Confederate emblem as part of their state flag. Voted, I think, by about 2/3 to keep it. And just this week, the legislature and the governor signed, it's no longer the flag, of Mississippi. Incredibly important. On a similar vein, those of us who live in the Washington, D.C. area, greater Washington area, one of the things that, I've lived here for 30 plus years. And one of the things that I've always found most troubling about living here is the name of the football team, you know, and just this week, the steps have been taken that will lead, I would predict that would lead within the next few months to having a new name for the football team that isn't a racist slur on American Indians. That is not an insignificant thing. At least I find it really quite an important thing. You know, and then there's, you know, Stonewall Jackson down in Richmond, and Jefferson Davis statues, all the statues coming down, and there's a lot happening. And this weekend, you know, this weekend of July 4th weekend, just reflecting on American democracy, and thinking about American democracy as a way of seeing American democracy as a way of seeing how we can live together in a way that enhances freedom, that allows freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of assembly, all of these freedoms that will create the conditions for the pursuit of happiness, not guaranteeing happiness, but guaranteeing the right to search for happiness in our own lives, in our own ways, all of that. This framework, if you like, this way of seeing, which we know 244 years ago, we know was a, we were talking just a little while ago about the play, and now the kind of now on TV, Hamilton. That period, the extraordinary, in a sense, extraordinary brilliance of those men who, created this American experiment. And we know that the reality and the truth was that this was, that those who could benefit from that experiment at that time were white people, predominantly white people with the resources, with resources and money, not women, not people of color. That slavery was, written into the Constitution, in terms of ownership of those who were enslaved. And yet this experiment has created, I would say, has created great possibilities. It has created the possibilities of women arguing for, struggling for their freedom, of African Americans struggling, throughout history and throughout the, since the nation was founded and before, struggling for freedom. And that, for gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer people to be able to struggle for their freedom, and for all of us to be able, it has provided a framework, if you like, for all of these, and potentially everybody to say, I have a right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, just as anyone else does. And, speaking for myself, coming here as an immigrant, coming from another democracy, there's something about this American experiment that spoke to my heart, not as a kind of a fixed thing that was set up in 1776 and onward from there, but as a possibility, as the possibilities that providing a framework, a way of seeing and a way of living together that provided the possibility of all of us finding freedom. Not that it was an end result, not that it was kind of guaranteed, because it wasn't a reality. Up to the Civil War, it wasn't a reality. And even for 100 years after that, the century of Jim Crow was not a reality for people of color in this country. but it was the basis on which and from which the civil rights movement, Dr. King, and everyone was able to say, and I'm going to kind of reflect on his March on Washington speech in a minute, was able to argue for that we are part of this too. We've been excluded from this and we are part of this. And so many others have been able to take this kind of the words and the understanding from almost 2.5 centuries ago and say, yes, we believe in this, and you in power, you need to live up to what you claim to be the case. And so we're at this time right now where for some substantial part of the population, the expansion of American democracy to those who've been excluded, those to gay and lesbian, transgender, bisexual, who've been excluded, even those who've been included, but making it difficult for them to take advantage of democracy. So the attempts to make it harder for people to vote. There are substantial numbers of people who adhere to the notion of American democracy, but when it comes to the actual kind of living expansion of American democracy, feel fearful and threatened by that expansion. And they are the ones who are, who are fighting to suppress the vote and all the different ways. And I don't mean that to say that from a place of judgment, but just from a place of more of description. There are others who see under the current administration that there isn't democracy. I read a letter in the New York Times yesterday. It was a very well-written letter, somewhat, with some reactivity in it, but it was from a 77-year-old woman. She says, "This is the first time in my 77 years that I won't be celebrating the 4th of July. I won't be wearing my stars and stripes shirt, playing patriotic songs, attending a parade, or displaying my American flag." And she goes into the reasons in terms of the current occupant of the White House. And she finishes up by saying, "I pray that next year we will have a new president who believes in the rule of law, the Constitution, and the premise that, quote, all men are created equal. Then I will once again be able to call myself a proud American instead of just a very ashamed one." So for her, this is no longer a democracy, kind of on the other side of the political spectrum. This is no longer a democracy because of who the current the occupant of the White House is. I have to say that I had similar views. I lived here for about 15 years before I became a citizen, because I didn't feel I wanted to become a citizen while Ronald Reagan was president. So that was my kind of choice at that time, and once Bill Clinton got in. But then I look back on that and I'm saying, well, that's a very partial view of American democracy that I had myself, that, why does it depend on whether a Democrat or a Republican's in the White House? So again, that I think is also a somewhat limited view. And the question I come back to is this framework: does it lead to freedom or does it lead to suffering? If you take American democracy and you have a fearful view of, well, if it expands, we're going to lose our privileges, we're going to lose our rights, then it doesn't lead to freedom, it leads to contraction. So in that sense, the way it's used, and I'd say also for the case for somebody who says, I don't believe we're a democracy anymore. Maybe they don't go quite that far, but while this person is in the White House. What I believe, and what many many great Americans have kind of put out as their vision, those struggling for freedom, for all of those who've been excluded and disenfranchised, is a view of American democracy really as a possibility. And I just want to, as I mentioned, just share a little bit from Dr. Martin Luther King's March on Washington speech. He says, he begins by saying, this day will go down as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation, August of 1963. He says 50 years ago, and the language obviously is the language of 1963, 50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today, the Lincoln Memorial, signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. He goes on to say, but 100 years later, the Negro is still not free, still crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. And then he says, so we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was the promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, people, women, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And he says it's obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. And so we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. And just to kind of connect it even more closely with today, he goes a little further along. He says, I'm not unmindful that some of you have come here out of great trials and tribulations. Some of you have come fresh from narrow jail cells. Some of you have come from areas where your quest for freedom left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. So this was 57 years ago in August of 1963, 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863. So all of this to say that in this way that Martin Luther King and others kind of have understood the American experiment and the American vision, limited and narrow as it was in 1776 in terms of who was part of this vision, who was seen to be part of this, genuinely part of this experiment. It became the framework from which and out of which all those who'd been excluded and marginalized and disenfranchised and subject to poll taxes and wealth taxes and all of the other ways of keeping things narrow and keeping the privileges of those who have privileges and have had privileges. That this limited vision, I mean, this wonderful vision, but limited in reality vision could be used as a framework, as a way of seeing things and a way of living together that could advance freedom. So this is a way of seeing that could be taken, a framework could be taken in a narrow way of like, oh, it's what was said back then and nobody else should be included. It's kind of a closed vision. Or it can be used in that expansive way of Dr. King coming to Washington and saying, here is a check that you wrote us and it's come back, it's bounced. And we're coming and saying, we want what is promised to us. I mean, extraordinary power of that language and those images. And so in this way, this reflecting on this 4th of July weekend, this vision of democracy is one, it's a way of seeing, it's a framework that leads to freedom, to political freedom, to freedom, freedom of speech and personal liberty, the freedom, to do whatever I want as long as it doesn't, hurt other people. As that old saying goes, your freedom stops where my nose begins. That, obviously it kind of works both ways, that it has to be that the balance and the boundaries. And so that vision of democracy, I believe, is one that leads to the potential for people being able to pursue happiness. Clearly, it's still deeply flawed, as we see in all of in the uprising that we're experiencing in these times, in these days, in these months. Particularly since the killing of George Floyd and everything that's come up, before that and after that, and how that's all really constellated around an understanding that something fundamental has to be addressed, that's deep-rooted, that isn't just about bad apples in police forces or bad apples in somewhere else, but is deeply grounded in that vision itself. The flaws at the root of it have to be dealt with. There's a wonderful article in today's New York Times Magazine by Isabel Wilkerson, who wrote the amazing book, The Warmth of Other Suns, about the African-American migration north from the beginning of the 20th century up through the 60s and 70s. An incredible piece where I haven't read the whole thing, but just the beginning of it, she talks about American democracy as like a house, buying an old house. And the old house has, some fundamental flaws in it. And you can do the kind of pasting and band-aids over things, but you're going to have to at some point deal with kind of, if there's dry rot at the root of everything, it's not going to be forgiven just by band-aids. In the end, the floor is going to fall away. And that's where we are, I think, in this moment. So coming back to this notion of ways of seeing, frameworks for understanding that lead to freedom or don't lead to freedom. They could lead to suffering. Just taking it from the kind of the political level to the personal level, more individual level, you could think of a way of seeing in relation to one's own optimism or pessimism about possibilities in the world. The studies show that if you have a pessimistic view of the world and your own role in the world, your life experiences and your life chances are going to be dramatically different than if you have a view, an optimistic, a positive view. And the understanding is that people have, tend to have and develop. It's not just have as a permanent thing, but have and develop pessimistic or optimistic views, particularly develop because our life experiences tend to lead us in one direction or another. For example, if you're a child and your parents divorce while you're a child, or you lose a parent while you're a child, or you have other, difficult or painful experiences, you're more likely to gravitate towards a view that says, things aren't going to work out or things are going to go wrong. And when you have that view, the tendency to see, bad things that happen as they're about me, they're going to go on forever, and they're going to affect all aspects of my life. And you contrast that with somebody who says, if a bad thing happens, just one time thing, I'll find a way to get around it. It won't affect the other areas of my life, won't go on forever. And the differences in the life experience and the life chances of those who have, an optimistic versus a pessimistic view of the world are tremendous. In terms of mental health, in terms of depression, in terms of success in college and finding jobs and all of those things. And this again is a way of seeing. It's a way of seeing the world, seeing the world as, oh, it's fearful, it's going to do me harm, or seeing the world, seeing the universe as, endless possibilities. I mean, the difference between those two views of the world are enormous, and they have enormous impact in terms of how our life unfolds. So the point I'm coming to really is a way of seeing, like optimistic, pessimistic view of the world, really can be judged and evaluated on the basis of, does it lead to happiness or does it lead to freedom? And a pessimistic view of the world tends to lead to unhappiness. And an optimistic, and I don't mean Pollyanna-ish, but an overall robust, optimistic view of the world tends to lead to greater happiness, greater well-being in our lives, better relationships, because we're more likely to see the possibilities in people rather than their flaws. So that's a view. So the question we can ask ourselves is, any view, any way of seeing, does it lead to greater happiness, or does it lead greater freedom, or does it lead to suffering? One other example, and it's similar in a way to it's similar in a way to the one I've just given of optimistic, pessimistic, but it's a little different. It's like, do you judge people, and people's actions as really saying something essential about them, or is it really more about their actions? So if somebody does something and maybe it's hurtful or harmful, one way of seeing that person and their actions is in a kind of essential way. They do something hurtful or harmful, they're a bad person. That's kind of like making it into about the person rather than their actions, versus there's somebody who, for whatever reason, did something that I view as harmful or painful, that caused me suffering or caused somebody else suffering. Again, it makes a huge difference whether we judge people on their, we attribute an essence to their actions, or we interpret their actions as, actions that, maybe the person was having a bad day, maybe they're, something came up for them that triggered them in that direction. There could be other explanations, but if we have an essential view, and I can't always say essentialist view of things, then we're more likely to see like, oh, this is the kind of person they are. And so we can choose our ways of seeing. Ways of seeing can be picked up and put down. I just want to go back a minute to that optimistic and pessimistic view and quote Martin Seligman, who's one of the a leader in the field of positive psychology. He says, teaching optimism to your children is as important as teaching them to work hard or be truthful, for it can have just as profound an impact on their later lives. So it makes a difference. So the question again, coming back, does this way of seeing, this framework, this way of understanding things, does it lead to greater freedom, or does it lead to to more suffering, to more unhappiness. So the invitation now, just right now, just reflect in your own life. Are there ways of seeing that you have that kind of pull you more towards suffering? Are there ways of seeing that incline you more towards happiness, towards freedom? It's just an invitation to look at the way we are in the world, how we act in the world, how we engage in the world, how we interpret the world, as what is that way of seeing, or what are the ways of seeing, because we tend to have a lot of different ways of seeing, and does it lead to happiness? Does it lead to greater freedom, to greater well-being? And I want to just coming more towards the end of this reflection, I want to come back to the Dharma, to the teachings and practices, particularly of the Buddha, of Buddhism. These teachings and practices themselves are a way of seeing. They're a way of understanding things that the Buddha claims, says, and many of us might adhere to this view as well, that the Buddha claims leads to happiness and leads to complete freedom from suffering. So we can use this framework, this way of seeing, that has at its core these four noble truths, the truth about suffering, the cause of suffering being clinging, the end of suffering coming from letting go of clinging, and a path to the end of suffering, a kind of skillful path of training in ethics and in insight, wisdom, and in terms of meditation that leads to freedom. We can take this framework, this way of seeing of the Dharma. You don't have to become a Buddhist or anything, but you can take this and you take other, inputs from other wisdom traditions and say, okay, what happens when I do this? What happens when I explore my life? I look at my life in terms of, let's say, the Four Noble Truths as the kind of the central teaching of the Buddha. Do I notice in myself that when I suffer, it's connected with clinging on my part? If I suffer, if I experience unsatisfactoriness or dissatisfaction, that it's in some way linked to what I'm believing, what I'm holding on to, what I'm clinging to, or what I'm resisting, or what I'm disconnecting from. Is there a relationship between my suffering and my actions, my thoughts and my actions, and that clinging? And when I open to and see that clinging, the places where I am holding on or clinging, and I let go, do I experience freedom? Do I experience a letting go when I do that? Do I experience that as liberating? And that's really what we're invited to do with these teachings and practices, to take on this way of seeing as an exploration, as a way of engaging in our own lives with whatever we're dealing with in our families, in our work, in our communities, in our society at large, just to use that framework, that way of seeing. And does it in fact lead to freedom? That's really the bottom line. As I said before, any way of seeing can be evaluated, assessed, judged, I think, by virtue of its success or otherwise in leading us to greater freedom in our lives. And my own experience of the Dharma, of the Buddha's teachings and practices, is that they have this, that they work in practice. When I notice I can let go, I also let go of what I'm clinging to. I experience freedom. As Ajahn Chah says, I share this quote a lot, let go a little and you have a little peace, a little freedom. Let go a lot, you'll have a lot of peace, freedom. Let go completely, completely and you'll experience great peace and freedom in your life. Your struggle with the world will be at an end. I can't speak from my struggle with the world being completely at an end, but I can certainly talk about, about letting go a little and letting go a lot, and the experience of that, how that is experienced in my own life. And I'm sure probably almost everyone who's here together today has some experience of that. How is it to let go? How is it to notice, to pay attention where we're holding on, and then to let go, to see how that holding on, how that clinging actually keeps us caught up in suffering, around how we're viewing somebody as they're like this, and then kind of being able to open and see in a broader sense their humanity and their different dimensions, and being able to kind of, something shifts in that letting go of a fixed view, as just one simple example. So ways of seeing that free us. And so my invitation this morning is to reflect in your own life on the ways of seeing, what you use as ways of seeing. And obviously in the kind of the spiritual and the practice way that I'm mainly talking about, but also, in terms of how, your own life of, pessimistic or optimistic view of things, are there kind of fixed views of, oh, it's always going to be like this, or this always happens to me? Or is there a much more kind of openness and fluidity about that? Is there a kind of more essential view of, if somebody does something, do we tend to solidify them and say, you're this type of person because you did this? Or can we be more open and fluid and see everybody as a work in progress, and having that possibility of changing? And in terms of the political system, how are we looking at this democracy and its possibilities, and our own role and relationship, our relationship to it, and our role within it? So that's a lot of things to think about this morning. And I just want to leave it there, maybe with this final reflection this is from Robert Bly, that on the importance of coming back to self-acceptance. Because any change, any beneficial change, any letting go, I think has to really begin from accepting ourselves as we are, not being separate from ourselves. And what he says, and others have said it in similar language, every part of us that we don't learn to accept and love will become hostile to us. Every part of us that we don't learn to accept and love will become hostile to us. So one of the most important areas of our practice, I think, is to keep coming back to accepting all parts of ourselves, and not having parts of ourselves that are somehow separated off, because I think they will cause us suffering. So if we feel, in a relationship, say that, a partner or a spouse or a child kind of triggers us, it's very easy and natural for that triggering to kind of respond. You go back from that, you react to that in reactivity. You say that, and now I hit back at you. The habit energy of doing that can become very strong in relationships. If we've been with somebody for years and decades, probably you know what I'm talking about. That it's very easy and natural to go into that reactivity. But if we can first come back to the ouch, maybe that part of ourself that feels oneself, that feels vulnerable, hurt, unseen, unheard, that we can go back and just speak to and connect with that part of ourselves that's kind of vulnerable, that's in pain. If we can do that, it's not always easy in the heat of the moment to do that, as we know. But if we can, just remembering to come back and take care of ourselves, to bring acceptance to all parts of ourselves. And that, I think, is a fundamental part of really healing our hearts and healing, finding our way out of suffering. So let's pause there and begin, and we'll have a meditation. We'll have a little bit of opening to the group, and Emily will lead us in some movement, mindful movement, and then we'll go into the final meditation. So take some moments to sit in a way that's comfortable and relaxed. So I shared a lot of words and a lot of thoughts there. So just noticing as you bring your attention inward, just what's alive for you, what's present for you right now. And close your eyes if you'd like to, and kind of come down into your body, maybe consciously inviting yourself to let go of the thoughts for a while and just come into the body. Feel your body. Feel the contact, the connection with the surface beneath you. Feel the weight of your body pushing down on your buttocks, on your thighs. Let your attention come into the body, the shoulders. Notice how the shoulders are right now. Just invite a relaxing of the shoulders. Imagine any tension that you're holding there just kind of drains down through the body, down into the ground. And then letting your chest be open so you can breathe easily. Just notice how the chest and the torso feel. Notice if you're clenching your stomach muscles. A lot of us do that in a habitual way. Maybe invite the belly to relax. Notice how your breathing is. Notice if it's tight and short. And you could just let the breath, consciously let it deepen. You could invite a nice full deep in-breath, filling the chest, filling the lungs. Just hold it for a moment and then release, letting go on the out-breath. Full, deep out-breath until all of the breath is released. And then nice deep in-breath again, as though you're inflating a balloon. Filling the chest, filling the lungs, and then releasing, letting go on the out-breath. So you might take a few more longer, deeper breaths in your own time as a way of inviting the body and the mind to relax and be at ease. Invite a calming of the body as you breathe in and breathe out. Breathing in, calming the body. Breathing out, calming the mind. And in your own time, letting the breath settle back to its natural rhythm. Breathing in, breathing out. And as a way of relaxing a little more, if you like to, you could consciously invite a smile to your face. Just inviting the corners of the eyes and the corners of your mouth into the expression of a smile. Thinking of a loved one or a dear friend or somebody who easily makes you feel happy, joyful, relaxed. Maybe letting their image relax the body and the mind. Again, if it's helpful. So letting your awareness come to your overall experience right now, and beginning by relaxing and just be aware of whatever you're experiencing right now. Notice what's present in the body and make space, if you can, for whatever is here. Maybe there's tightness or tension in one area of the body, chest or the belly or the face. And you might consciously just let the awareness come to that area with kindness. And just make space for it, maybe just lengthening the breath a little bit and just allowing a natural softening, a natural relaxing to happen. Notice what's present in the field of emotions, if anything. Now, is there any feeling of calm or joy or peace? Is there any feeling of sadness or grief or anger or annoyance or fear? Whatever is here, see if you can just with kindness make space for it. Just letting whatever feelings are here come and go in their own time. If you are experiencing some tension or some conflict or resistance, it can be helpful just to put a hand or both hands on the heart or in the belly, just connecting with your own experience right now, bringing a quality of care and of kindness to what's present right now. If you're familiar with the image of Rumi's image of the guest house, of welcoming the guests, that can be at times maybe a helpful image, just guests coming to visit. And just welcoming the guests if you can, making space for them, letting them stay as long as they want to stay. And then when they're ready, just letting them pass in their own time. And again, if it's helpful, you could use the breath as an anchor for your awareness, as a focus that helps you just to be here. Can be particularly useful if the mind is very busy and active. To just bring a light awareness to breathing in and breathing out. Just knowing that you're breathing in, knowing that you're breathing out. And when you notice that the mind is off somewhere else, just gently and kindly, just coming back to the body, coming back to the breath, coming back to this moment without judgment. And whatever's arising moment to moment, see if you can meet it with kindness and with acceptance. This moment just as it is right now. In Dorothy Hunt's words, peace is this moment without judgment, this moment in the heart space where everything that is welcome. Just feeling yourself here with everyone else, part of a wider community of people committed to waking up and living more wisely and more kindly. How these teachings and practices can be a way of seeing that can help us find greater freedom in our lives. In a completely non-dogmatic way, not believing anything, but really seeing for oneself. What happens when I bring awareness to my experience? What happens when I can let go of clinging? What happens when I cultivate compassion, loving kindness, equanimity, gratitude, generosity, these kind of states of mind and heart that lead to freedom? What happens when I do this? Is there greater freedom in my life? Is there greater well-being and happiness? What do I notice? And we'll finish this meditation with a Zen parable. A man walking across, excuse me, a man walking across a field encountered a tiger. He fled, the tiger chasing after him. Coming to a cliff, he caught hold of a wild vine and swung himself over the edge. The tiger sniffed at him from above. Terrified, the man looked down to where, far below, another tiger had come, waiting to eat him. Two mice, one white and one black, little by little began to gnaw away at the vine. The man saw a luscious strawberry near him. Grasping the vine with one hand, he plucked the strawberry with the other. How sweet it tasted. As with any Zen parable, you can take it any way you want to. that particular story, it's only more than one way of taking it, but it's one that I enjoy. And I also want to share in regard to what I shared in the initial reflection talk, that I really hope that you can hear it that you can hear it as a way of seeing, and that what I'm sharing is my way of seeing. And I'm not, asking you to believe that way of seeing, but invite you, if that's a helpful way of seeing, or to reflect on that and explore that. And come back to that question, does it lead to happiness? Does it lead to well-being? And what I'd like to do is to do two things before Emily leads us in some movement. Be nice to get into our awareness of our bodies more, is to just invite a couple of reflections of anyone who would like to share. There's probably a lot more to share. So what I'd invite is maybe we'll just given time, we'll take a couple of reflections in vivo, as it were, in voice. And anyone else who'd like to share anything about today or how you're doing, please use the chat room, and I will consciously save that, and I think we can all save it as well. We go to the chat, and the little dots save chat. Okay. So anyone who'd like to share anything, please feel free to do that in the chat box, and maybe just see if there's one or two people who'd like to just share a reflection of how things landed for you, how you're doing. You might make raise a physical hand or raise a hand, and Nick will let me know or Cassie will let me know if there is anyone, and maybe it's left you speechless. Unlikely, but anyway, anyone who would like to share. Do we have anyone? And no obligation, and do please feel free to share in the chat box. And if we don't see anyone, we'll just go into have some movement right now. I see Pat in DC. If you want to unmute yourself, can you see your little mute button? No, we can't hear you. Sorry about that.
Okay, and unmuted.
Okay.
Yeah. So I just want to say that if I find myself feeling a little pessimistic, I kind of energize any gratitude I have, because that's just a basic positive way out of it immediately. I mean, it gets me off any highway, a bad pessimistic highway. So I just do that, and I find it really helpful.
Thank you for sharing that, Pat. I think I completely agree with you. I find gratitude one of the most powerful emotions we like to invite if I'm caught up in like wanting something, or I'm in annoyed or frustrated. If I can just come back to remember, what is it I already have. So yeah, I agree with you. I'd encourage everyone as well to just at least explore that, how it is for you. But thank you for sharing that, Pat. Maybe one more. Anything anyone would like to share?
Adriana has her hand up.
Please, Adriana.
Yes, hello. I'm sorry, I'm not using video today. Not really presentable in chat right now, video. I have a question, Hugh, and I want to thank you for this wonderful meditation and lecture. I have been feeling really frustrated with myself because on a conscious level, rational level, I know that the more positive state of mind will help me always feel more free and better. But the problem I'm having is that I always fall back on the vortex of reactivity, as Tara would put it, and in the frustration and pessimism. And so then the second arrow comes and I beat myself up for knowing that I have to be more positive and trying every single day, but yet falling short. And so what would be some practical tools that you could share with me, if you will, please, to shift my mind towards a more positive view and actually be effective, because apparently just telling myself is not working. And I really appreciate your help. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriana. That's a wonderful, wonderful question. The way I think about it and look at it is many, and I'd say probably most of these patterns that we create, these habits of mind, particularly the ones like judgment and the inner critic and, harsh judgment and criticism. These we have cultivated. We haven't necessarily said, oh, I'm going to cultivate an attitude of judgment and blame towards myself. But actually, that's what we have done over time. We've kind of fueled that habit by thinking it and then rethinking it and 100,000 times over that habit. So the first thing I would say is, if you can be kind to yourself and compassionate to yourself, to recognize that it's not just you, but all of us experience that this being human, that habits that we've developed, over a long period of time, they don't just go away when we typically, they may in a very rare occasion do it, but typically they don't go away just by being seen, just by being kind of, okay, oh, there I am, judging myself. Okay, dealt with judgment. It's a saying that there's no such thing as a one-walk dog. If you've heard that expression, just walk it and then you're done for life. It's like with these habits that, that we keep, that those grooves run really deep, particularly things that go back to early childhood, our views of ourselves, all of that, that we've built them up over time. We've built a sense of identity around them, and then they can become very entrenched. So in a way, what we're doing often is we're kind of drip by drip, kindness by kindness by kindness, acceptance by acceptance by acceptance. We're kind of softening the effect of these habits. So what I find a very helpful one is, if a lot of criticism and self-judgment come up, if I can quickly come in and say, forgiven, as Tara uses that, I think, Tara Brach, kindness. I'm just coming and just bringing compassion to myself, just recognize, oh, this is hard, kindness could be a word, kindness could be putting a hand on our hearts, and just kind of softening that harsh critical energy, and just to keep doing it and to see it as a practice over time. Because what we're doing really is we're developing and strengthening that quality of self-acceptance. And that doesn't tend to change in a day or a week or maybe even a month or a year. It just but over time we can soften it and we can shift it. There's a lot more that I could say about that if we had the time, but I'll just leave it there for now. And maybe the best thing we can do, invite more reflections in the chat and invite Emily to lead us in some movement. Thank you, Emily. And thank you all.
Thank you, so helpful, thank you.
Thank you, Adriana.
So if everyone would like to take the opportunity to stand and to find a grounded place with your feet, and then turning your palms out, inhale, rise up, lifting up, reaching up, and here gather the energy of the sky, the sunshine, the wind, and bring that energy to your heart. And then gather the energy of all those who are here, the compassion, the kindness, and thoughtfulness, and bring that to your heart. And then gather the energy of the earth, the abundance, and the nutrients, that which sustains us, and bring that to your heart. We'll be doing 6 movements of the spine, and we start with a twist. So lifting up, bringing your arms up into cactus pose. And we'll be moving 3 times to the right. Inhale. Exhale, right. Back to center. Exhale, right. And back to center. Exhale, right. And center. Inhaling deeply, exhale left. And center. Exhale left. And center. Exhale left. And center. Just for a moment, drop your hands down. And rise. And down. And rise. Stretching up, clasp your right wrist in your left hand. Breathe in and tilt to your left, drawing the energy from your right hip out, extending out. One, inhale into your right rib cage, and exhale, rise. Clasp your hands, your left wrist in your right hand. Inhale deeply, exhale to the right, extending from the left hip out, reaching out. And inhale, rise, float your arms down, palms down, floating. And then shake it up. Just relax. Swing from side to side, releasing and relaxing. And then clasping your hands at the back of your waist, breathing in. Exhale, extend your arms out, lifting your chest, dropping your head back, and bring it back to your waist. Another deep inhale. Exhale, extend, reaching away from your body and back to the waist. Last time, inhaling deeply. Exhale, extend out and back to the waist. Shake out your hands. And the last movement, bring your hands above your knees. Breathing in, lifting your chest up, and exhale, slowly fold down. Dropping down, allowing gravity to shift your weight down. Breathing, exhaling down, touching the earth if you can, or your shins, or remain above your thighs wherever is comfortable. Feeling the earth underneath your feet. Take a deep inhale here. Exhale with a sigh. Another inhale. Exhale with a sigh. And last time, inhaling. And now, press on your feet. Bring your hands back above your knees. Pressing up, down to rise up. Bring your hands to heart center and release to the sky. Release to the room and to the earth. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Thanks so much, Emily. That's lovely to get into our bodies and connect with all of the areas we might not have been aware of. So thank you. We are going to, it'll be a shorter meditation, just time-wise, and about 10 minutes to finish. So I invite you to, again, find a comfortable posture, relaxing, letting the chest be open, inviting the shoulders to relax, letting the eyes gently close if you like to do that. You might, if it's helpful, take a couple of deeper breaths just to relax back into being here. You can also invite the smile if that's helpful. And these can be helpful practices to come back to and use in our in our everyday lives as well as in our meditation, to be able to take a deeper breath or some deeper breaths when we're feeling tense or tight or frustrated, just coming back. And the smile too, even if we're not feeling happy or joyful, just to come into the expression of a smile sends a message to our brain and to our nervous system that we can be, we don't have to be vigilant, kind of in the fight or flight mode, we can relax. So just inviting a sense of ease. One of the most helpful things for us to pay attention to in meditation, as well as in our daily lives, is our attitude towards our experience. Often we can be unaware of our attitudes. We might be feeling frustrated or annoyed, but we just kind of take it as that's the weather system. But with attitudes, if we're aware of them, then we're in a position to change them. And in meditation and with mindfulness, we can be aware when our attitude is one of resistance or frustration or annoyance. We can meet that with kindness and acceptance. We can let our overall attitude be one of kindness, of interest, of acceptance. We can ask ourselves, how am I meeting this moment, this experience? How am I meeting this moment? Am I in some way in a struggle with it? Or is there a sense of flow or a sense of acceptance? And inviting that quality of kindness and acceptance. Using the breath as a focus or anchor if that's useful to you. Just aware of breathing in and breathing out. Knowing that you're breathing in, knowing that you're breathing out. So can you hold whatever is present right now with kindness, with care, with acceptance? And if it's difficult or too painful to do that, what can help you be here now? What resources, what supports can you connect with that can make it a little bit easier? At times it can be as simple as putting your hand on your heart or on your belly. It could be shifting your attention from annoyance or anger or frustration to gratitude, to appreciation of all that you have. That can be particularly helpful if we're in the mindset of things aren't going right, or I don't have enough, or I need this or that, or something should change, needs to change. Just to come back and appreciate what we have that we so easily take for granted. That when we bring it to mind and heart, can be hugely supportive of when we're dealing with difficulties. In these last few minutes of the meditation, you might just breathe in a wish, an intention of kindness and acceptance towards yourself, towards all that you're experiencing now in these times. With a deeper breath, maybe with a hand on the heart, just caring about this being yourself, the Buddha, so that you could travel all around the world, all around the universe, and not find anyone more deserving of your own kindness and affection and care. So breathing in a wish of compassion, of acceptance towards yourself. And you might breathe out a similar wish of kindness, acceptance, compassion towards the world, towards people generally, or towards individuals, towards all beings, human and non-human, towards the earth. Wherever your heart takes you at this moment, breathing in care and kindness for yourself, and breathing out kindness and care for others and for the world, for all beings. Just sharing this reflection from Albert Camus. Seems apt in these times. He says, in the middle of winter, I at last discovered that there was in me an invincible summer. In the middle of winter, I at last discovered that there was in me an invincible summer. Thank you, everyone. It's been a joy to be together. We're just going to finish with a few announcements. I'll just share a couple of things and then pass it over to Pat to share some things around the center. One thing I'm conscious of is every week I experience, I think probably we do as well, a certain tightness around time. You know, there's often a kind of feeling that when we do the breakout groups that they're too short, need a bit more time, but then do you take time from the talk? I don't usually do a talk as long as I did today, but, you know, we obviously want to have the movement and then we want to have time for sharing, and it's not. So anyway, all of that. And I just want to share that I'm reflecting that maybe it might just ease things up a little bit if we had 12:15 as a finish time as opposed to 12. So I'm just put that out there as a thought, put it out to the universe. And we were talking a little bit before. Some of you may know that that the Insight Meditation Community of Washington, this is the overall kind of umbrella for all that we do, has made the board has made a decision that there won't be any more in-person classes until at least before the end of until the end of 2020. And so, you know, the Center for Mindful Living in Tenleytown, that's where this class kind of came from and is really a part of. You know, we don't have any alternative, obviously, to go with that. So just to kind of, as Sharon suggested before we started today, it'd be good just to kind of name that, you know, that this will be the way forward for the rest, at least for the rest of this calendar year. So, you know, we take the joys of that and also obviously the limitations of that we can't be in person, but it's, you know, it's a bigger issue than any one community or any one organization and stuff, so that we're doing our best to be supportive of the well-being of all in the choices and decisions that we're making. A couple of things of my own kind of programs and stuff coming up. My partner Rebecca and I are teaching a day-long retreat this coming Saturday, June. I guess that's the July the 11th, and I believe it's the 11th, isn't it? Yes, the 11th, next Saturday. So check the IMCW website for that. It's kind of finding steadiness of heart and mind in these times. I hope it'll be helpful, doing meditations and movement and walking and different practices. I also have a class Tuesday evening. Some of you come to that. Just a shorter class, 7 to 8, if it'd be helpful during the week. And I've got a 4-day retreat I'm doing through Southern Dharma Retreat Center online on a couple of weeks from now. So if you're interested in that, let me know. July 22nd to 26th. That's a way of practicing in a more intensive way in our own spaces, etc. I'll leave it there and pass